Hello, welcome. This webinar is for the Education Specialist 2018 Program Standards and Teaching Performance Expectations. It is the technical assistance that was provided in November and December of 2019 for all preliminary programs who will be transitioning to the new standards in the summer and fall of 2022. This technical assistance will cover both the standards, what has changed. We will go over the transition plan, what the expectations is for the program submitting that, and the plan for implementation, both the program summary, the course sequence, the course matrix, and the fieldwork and clinical practice.
So at the end of this webinar, you should have an understanding of the revisions made to the Education Specialist Program Standards, which were recently updated in October of 2019, specifically for Standard 3D. We will also have a discussion about the teaching performance expectations and teaching performance assessment for the future, and the expectations for fieldwork and clinical practice in the new standards.
So, before we move on, you have Sarah Solari with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, a consultant who works with both special education and induction.
And I am William Hattrick. I am a consultant here at the Commission working with preliminary education specialist programs. And thank you for joining us.
Currently, you are working with a set of program standards that include both program responsibility language and candidate competence language. When a program design team was pulled together, they were given the task of separating out the program language from candidate competence language. The candidate competence language became teaching performance expectations, and the programmatic language became program standards. You also currently have, in addition to the 16 program design standards that you work with, you have additional specialty area standards that cover your mild to moderate program, your moderate to severe program, your early childhood program, your deaf and hard of hearing program, and your visually impaired program. In the future, when you implement the new program standards, you will have teaching performance expectations that address mild to moderate support needs, extensive support needs, early childhood special education, deaf and hard of hearing, and visual impairments. But all programs will function under one set of program standards. So, the important thing to realize is that the new standards that will take effect in the summer and fall of 2022 have one set of program standards that cover all 5 preliminary special education credentials, and that the focus of these new credentials are really on student support needs.
And just to add on to that, looking at student support needs, you will also find that in the new system, the credentials mild, moderate support needs and extensive support needs overlap the disability categories, with the exception of deaf-blind, which is only found in the extensive support needs credential. And the reason for this is so that the specific educational needs of the student are emphasized in addition to their disability category.
Okay, so if you want more information about this, the program standards and the teaching performance expectations that will go into effect in the summer and fall of 2022, we have a PSA 1907 that provides details about the transition process that all preliminary programs will follow.
And it is also important to remember that autism and the English learner authorizations are still embedded within the credentials. And as Sarah mentioned prior, Each of the 5 specialty areas does have its own unique set of TPEs. Within those TPEs, or the mild to moderate support needs and extensive support needs credentials, those teachers will also meet the universal teaching performance expectations, which are the general education TPEs in their preparation programs. And when you are looking at documentation we have online listing the teaching performance expectations for mild to moderate and extensive support needs, the universal TPEs are already embedded in those documents. So you will see the universal TPEs followed by the specialty area specific for mild to moderate and extensive support needs.
You should note that these links that you see on the PowerPoint presentation, which this PowerPoint presentation is available on our website. These links are live links. You may click on them. It'll bring you right to, in this case, the PSA that you see on the PowerPoint slide. Okay. So, the Plan to Transition review. This link, Plan to Transition, brings you right to our special education webpage, where you may download the Plan to Transition, which is a Word document. The Plan to Transition is due between January 1st of 2020 through June 1st of 2020. This really is your big picture view of what it's going to take your program to move to these new standards and teaching performance expectations. This is something that you can use with your governance panel, with partners, so that they can better understand where the shift is in these standards, where the new responsibilities will lie for clinical practice, since candidates now have a 600-hour minimum requirement. So this is a good document to use in those types of meetings that you have with your partners. You should note that that second bullet, the transition plan template was recently updated for standard 3D. Please make sure that you are using the link that we have on this slide, since there was a paragraph omitted on the previous plan to transition that was on our website. When you click on that link, it should say on the very bottom of the document that it was updated October of 2019. So make sure that you are using the most current plan to transition when you submit your transition document to the CTC.
And since the Plan to Transition is a planning document for your institution and programs, you are given the option to submit one transition plan for all of your preliminary programs, or you can choose to submit a separate transition plan for each of your programs, whatever will be the most beneficial and useful to you, because this is a planning document to get you ready to transition to these new program standards.
Okay. The second item covered in the PSA is the Plan for Implementation Review. This is a much more heavy lift for programs. This really gets into the details of how your program is truly transitioning to the new standards and implementing the teaching performance expectations. And we haven't reinvented the wheel here. We actually took from our existing process, which is program review, and we use 4 of the required elements and 7 specific exhibits that are submitted when it is time for your program review. So what are those 4 required elements that we require? Well, the first is the program summary. So you are submitting a program summary that provides that brief overview of the structure, the course of study, and assessment of candidates for your program. You should have a clear description of how your program is designed. This requires you to really think about your program and how it will be offered, what candidates will experience from start to finish. And that's what the program summary entails.
And I'll also add, when you look at the plan for implementation instructions, there is a template linked for completing the program summary. So that will give you an idea of the topics to cover in that summary.
The second item would be the course sequence. So once you have this vision of your program, then of course you detail out what courses your candidates will take. And this would be the draft course sequence from your course catalog, the one that you're submitting for institutional review and approval. Now, we don't need the detailed documents that you submit for review and approval to your institution, but we do need the course sequence from your course catalog, so that description of courses that you would have, that your candidates would take from start to finish.
Okay, the next required submission is a course matrix, and that will be for each of the preliminary ed specialist programs that your institution offers. And this is also very similar to what is required in program review. Since we know that you may still be in the planning process when the plan for implementation is due in October of 2021, you will be given the option of linking where a specific TPE concept is introduced, and then you will also need to show us where that element is practiced and assessed. However, you do not have to have live links to where the element is practiced and assessed in the syllabus. So the requirement is only that you link where the TPE element is introduced. And it's also important to remember that you want to show the best representation in a coursework, in a course or activity for that TPE element. It does not have to show every single place that concept is introduced, practiced, and assessed. And that's so that reviewers and other staff looking at this can have a clear idea of where that TPE element is introduced, practiced, and assessed.
Okay, the next piece that will need to be submitted is actually much larger. It's the fieldwork and clinical practice component. And this is first, it's divided out into 4 sections. First, A, it's for a table that denotes the number of hours that each candidate is required to participate in early fieldwork and supervised clinical practice, and how those hours are broken out across fieldwork and clinical practice hours. Now, we get many questions about this, specifically supervised clinical practice. And the thing to think about here is, do you know where your candidates are and why they are there? So you have to be really thoughtful about, I am sending my candidates to this particular site to observe for this, and those candidates are coming back, and we will either have a discussion, they will reflect, they will write. There's some product that that candidate will create around some specific topic. So it's purposeful. You're really, it's not that the candidate goes out, finds a classroom on their own, and observes for 10 hours for whatever, right? It's not mindless. It is absolutely purposeful, and you direct their practice in that sense. So that's what supervised clinical practice means. The second piece is the training materials that you use to train your veteran practitioners serving in support and our supervisory roles. You're going to provide these training materials. The third are any draft manuals or handbooks, any advising materials or links to those advising materials that provide information to districts and candidates about expectations within the clinical experience, including appropriate placements, veteran practitioner support, and information about clinical practice assessment for the 2022 and 23 year. That's the year of implementation. And then finally, any draft syllabi for supervised clinical experiences in that 2022 and 23 year. The syllabi does need to include information regarding how the candidate will be assessed during clinical practice, and copies of the blank assessment instruments should be included.
Okay, we will now move into a discussion of each of the 6 program standards that will govern all preliminary education specialist programs. We'll start with Standard 1, Program Design and Curriculum. So similar to the current Standard 1, you are required to have a clearly articulated theory of teaching and learning that is research and evidence-based. There are enhanced topics so that candidates are able to identify the unique characteristics of students with autism, expanded disability categories that candidates would serve on this new credential, mild to moderate support needs, extensive support needs, etc. And there also needs to be a coherent candidate assessment system to provide formative information regarding the candidate's progress. I would also mention that when we are asked about a potential crosswalk between the current standards and the new ones, Standard 1 holds most of the information that is in the current program standards related to a program's responsibility. As you will see as we go through Standards 2 through 6, much of that language is new for implementing a teaching performance assessment, and new with respect to the new fieldwork and clinical practice requirements. So if you're looking for the place where existing program standard language is in the new standards, you should look in Program Standard 1, and you will find it there.
And keep in mind that we have, the credentials now have expanded to serve additional disability categories such as orthopedic impairments, traumatic brain injuries, and so you'll want to make sure that your curriculum includes those categories so that your candidates are adequately prepared to meet students with those needs. So Standard 2, preparing candidates to master the teaching performance expectations. This requires that the program teach, give candidates the opportunity to practice and assess the candidates on the TPEs. The course matrix development that you do really supports this standard. So if you've really identified where and how you're preparing your candidates to cover the TPEs, to learn and practice, then this standard should, you should be able to meet this standard.
Taking a look at Standard 3 clinical practice, it has been divided into 4 sections. And you will want to think about what this will look like at your institution and what aspects of your current clinical practice requirements you want to keep and what will need to be changed. The new standard language is very prescriptive and shows you specifically how many hours a candidate will need to have. And that is something that is a shift from the current program standard language. So in Program Standard 3A, it's discussing the organization of the clinical practices. I'll note that the experiences should be planned from the beginning of the program and will need to include experiences in general education and experiences with parents and families, and of course, in a broad range of service delivery options, which leads to that culminating placement where the candidate is working towards assuming full responsibility of the classroom in their specific credential area. For this, as mentioned earlier, there are going to be 600 required hours of clinical practice. At least 200 of those hours are supervised fieldwork that include guided observations and initial student teaching that must be provided to candidates in both general education and special education settings prior to the final student teaching. There is not a specific breakdown within those 200 hours of how many need to be in general education and how many need to be in special education, because we understand that a candidate may be in a variety of settings. They may be in an inclusive classroom. They may be serving for part of their clinical practice as a resource teacher, and they are going into general education classrooms, and maybe also pulling students out. So we do anticipate that all candidates have some level of experience in general education settings. And this would also include intern teachers. For intern teachers, they will need to have these same experiences as candidates who are following the traditional pathway. This means that your memoranda of understanding with your participating districts will need to reflect these new requirements so that intern teachers are able to have some time to get these broad range of experiences, whether it be once they are already a contracted teacher as part of their pre-service hours, but they are expected to meet these same requirements. Then the final 400 hours is in the desired credential area. It's also recommended that candidates working towards a dual credential in both general and special education would have an additional 150 hours of clinical practice. So that is recommended, though not required. Again, it just all depends on the setting that a teacher may be working in or have their clinical practice experience in. So in that case, the candidate would have 750 hours should their clinical practice requirement be extended that additional 150 hours. Another change comes with the orientation and preparation of program and district employed supervisors. The minimum amount of program supervision of each candidate is 4 times per quarter or 6 times per semester, and that district employed supervisor support should be 5 hours per week. And that can also be looked at as an average of time. That supervision can include in-person visits, video capture, synchronous video observation, but it has to either be archived, either by annotated video or scripted observation, and evaluated based on the TPEs that produce data that can be aggregated and disaggregated. All right, moving on to Section B, the preparation of faculty and or site supervisors and or program directors. So this is all about the selection of those who will be supervising your candidates. They should be experts in the ed specialist instructional area that the candidate is being supervised in, and also need to have recent professional experience in school settings where the curriculum aligns with California's adopted standards and frameworks. The program also needs to provide supervisors with an orientation to the expectations of the program, and this will also ensure that your supervisors are knowledgeable about the program curriculum and assessments, and this would include the new teaching performance expectations and a teaching performance assessment model. It's also expected that these supervisors maintain current knowledge of effective approaches such as cognitive coaching, adult learning theory, and content-specific pedagogy. Moving on to Part C, criteria for school placements. This has to do with the selection of sites that will be used for clinical practice for your candidates. All sites should demonstrate placement of students with disabilities in the least restrictive environment, be able to provide support for dual language learners with disabilities, and also provide an opportunity for candidates to interact with the variety of age groups in both general and special education settings that reflect the continuum of placement options. It's important to remember the authorization for which the candidate is working towards. For example, mild to moderate support needs is still a K through 22 credential and covers a broader range of disability categories than the current authorization. So it's just important to think about all of that when you're thinking and looking at what might be appropriate school placements. There also needs to be placement options that reflect the diversity of socioeconomic, linguistic, and cultural diversity, and it's also important that they are permitted to use video capture for candidate reflection. The site needs to have a fully qualified master teacher with an appropriate credential and also a fully qualified or credentialed site administrator. All right, and lastly, standard 3D. And as we mentioned earlier, this was the standard where a paragraph was omitted. It's the second paragraph there, if you were looking at the standards, related to the 10 hours of orientation that district employed supervisors are required to have. That 10 hours may not be required for all of your supervisors. If you have veteran supervisors who have worked with you for a long time, you can determine how much training is needed for them. It is expected, though, that with the implementation of a teaching performance assessment and the new TPEs for each specialty area, that your veteran practitioners, as well as new ones who are serving as supervisors, would need a few hours, if not more, of orientation from your program. You should be selecting district supervisors who hold a clear Ed Specialist credential and have a minimum of 3 years of teaching experience.
Okay, so moving on to Standard 4. Standard 4 should be fairly easy for you because this is something you already do with your current program, monitoring, supporting, and assessing candidate progress towards meeting the education specialist credential requirements. You should have a process in place to monitor and support your candidates through your program. You should also have a process to assist your candidates who may be struggling to either master the teaching performance expectations or to complete your program. And that's what this standard is all about. Moving on to Standard 5. Standard 5, currently, the title is Assessment of Candidate Competency, which will become the implementation of a teaching performance assessment in the future. It's really about how candidates will be guided, coached, and assessed on their performance in relation to the teaching performance expectations. So let's talk about that a little bit because we have had several focus groups across the state from August through October around designing a special education TPA. And what you have here on this slide are some dates. And we have projected these dates that there will be a pilot in the spring of 2021, that would be January through May of 2021, for the implementation of a teaching performance assessment for special education teachers. Then a field test in 2021 through 2022, and then become operational in 2022-23, which is the year that you will also be implementing the new standards and teaching performance expectations. Now, it's highly encouraged that you participate in both the pilot and the field test. By participating in these, you will be able to understand what is happening with the development of the teaching performance assessment so that you can better design your coursework and your clinical practice experiences for your candidates so that they will be successful on the TPA. So please participate in both the pilot and the field test. Evaluation systems will be conducting this work, and so you can look to our website to look for any updates on that work. All right, so let's go into Standard 5, which is really about implementing a teaching performance assessment. And this is new work for the special education community. This has not been a required element for special education teachers, although I know that some programs in the state do ask their teachers or teacher candidates to take a teaching performance assessment. Not all do. And so your general education counterparts have been implementing a teaching performance assessment with their candidates for about 20 years now. So don't hesitate to knock on their door to ask questions, to gather information. But for now, we have Standard 5 that will help guide you through how your program is going to implement a TPA. So specifically, 5A1 really deals with how your program will need a coordinator, that evaluation systems knows. So that person will be the point of contact. This person will be the one who receives the data for candidate scores every month. This person will be the one who attends the yearly program coordinator meeting. Will be the point person for your institution. 5A2, this is about the video. Your candidates will be videoing themselves teaching. So institutions need to have a point person who has that technical expertise to assist candidates when they have questions like, how do I clip this video? Usually this is someone in your tech department. It is not a faculty member. So make sure you find that point person. And again, knock on Gen Ed's door in your institution. Find out who are they using so that you can help your candidates successfully complete the video component. 5A2, MOUs. Now these are MOUs around permissions for the video. So candidates will be using videos in classrooms. Typically, school districts in California already have these video permissions in place. So this should not be much of a problem. Evaluation Systems does have a sample MOU that you can look at, that you may use, but really the candidates should not be going around collecting all these MOUs. This should be something that's already in place, that maybe your institution has an agreement with the district where you place your candidates. So, and again, currently I believe most districts have these video permissions in place as part of their first day packets. Okay, 5A3. Eventually, this is referring to that you may have a large enough mass of individuals and faculty on your campus where you can have a local scoring system, which really means that evaluation systems can come out and calibrate your faculty so that then you could, using the rubrics that are provided, score your own candidates' TPAs. 5A4. This is where you're going to need to think about the role that your credential analyst will play in aggregating the data over time. Because you will be collecting lots of data. Again, data has already been collected for your general education program, so you could tap on those people in your institution to figure out what's currently been occurring and figure out how you would like to collect that data. 5A5, faculty training. That same person that you identified as the program coordinator will probably be the person who's going to train your faculty. And that 10-hour training requirement that we referred to under the clinical practice, that could be, this training that's provided could be part of that 10-hour requirement too. So, 5A7. There needs to be an appeal process that should be posted on your website, in your catalog, as well as remediation policies. Candidates need to be able to access these materials. They need to be able to access all materials. You should have an open and transparent process. And as a side note there on the bottom, we've discovered that institutions may buy vouchers in advance for the Cal TPA so that candidates can purchase them using their financial aid money. That's one way to do it. So if institutions purchase the vouchers in advance, then the candidates can use their financial aid money to buy vouchers from the institution. So that's one way to assist candidates. Continuing on, 5B. A policy page has been developed that explains what you must and what you may do for candidates around the TPA, and that is posted on our special education website, and it will be right near this webinar. And this is also where you need to think about where the cycles will land in your program. 5B2. We mentioned the scores. You're going to know immediately. Scores are given to you monthly. Who has passed the TPA and who has not passed the TPA? And you should get in contact with those individuals. You're going to need to decide how many times are you going to let your candidates retake the TPA? What support and assistance are you going to provide those candidates? What is your policy and what is the process going to be for those candidates?